Hello, everyone. Hope everybody is having a great day in all their locations around the world. Thank you for spending some time with us today to learn a little bit more about a global ePRO case study and how the collection of electronic data can be managed incredibly well, and the number of steps around it and the considerations that can go into it. Wanted to make a quick introduction to our speakers today. First is Kaitlyn Townsley. She is the Associate Director of Product Innovation from Axiom. Myself, I'm Andrew Schachter, the founder and CEO. And with us from Axonics, thank you very much, Dr. Shetake. It's a pleasure to have you with us and greatly appreciate your time today.
Thank you, Andrew.
Before we jump in the bottom left corner of everybody's screen is a series of questions in a polls. I wanted to quickly introduce them to everybody, and then we're going to get started. The first question is, have you ever used ePRO? When you have used ePRO, does it talk to your EDC? The second, how much do you depend on real-time ePRO compliance reporting to manage your patients, of course, in your ePRO study? And then the final question, what percentage of your studies is ePRO the primary endpoint? The poll will remain open for the entire session. We appreciate your participation in it. And we will now jump into the case study itself. We're going to talk about a brief introduction to each organization. From there, we're going to dive into the case study itself, which is what the requirements were and how we got there, what the technology development methodology was, and how did the collective team ensure the appropriate results and data. I'm going to do a very brief introduction to Axiom. So just to give you a little bit of background, Axiom is an organization that created an e-clinical platform about 19 years ago. But the work that we do isn't so much about creating an electronic platform and so forth. It's really about using technology to drive collaboration. And that collaboration is ideally centered around real-time data that allows us to make better decisions. Next. The platform, as I mentioned, got started in terms of EDC 19 years ago. It grew, of course, to include data management, CTMS, inventory management, randomization, and of course, the essential component, which we're going to talk about today, being ePRO. Next. One of the most important things that we do at Axiom is help our clients have a full picture of what's happening within the study itself. But we do that because all of the data is available to communicate with each other, which really enables you to run a study differently than the pieces being separate and you're trying to combine reports to have an understanding of what's happening. Next. The platform as a whole is made up of multi-modules. They're all, once combined, they're single sign-on. So whatever modules our clients use, you have single sign-on access to all of the data and information, of course, based on your specific role. Next. Everything in Fusion is cloud-based, with the exception, obviously, of ePRO apps, which can be downloaded to an iPhone or Android device. Next. And the ePRO tools can work on tablets and on smartphones, iPhone, Android, so that you have maximum flexibility for whatever the format is that is required. Next. I'm going to turn it over to Zai for an introduction to Axonics.
Hi, thank you, Andrew. Hello, this is Zai Shetake. I work at Axonics as the Director of Clinical Science and Product Marketing. Briefly, my responsibilities involve data management and data analysis, and we work closely with Axiom to develop our EDC system for our pivotal study, which was the Artisan clinical trial. So the Artisan clinical trial, I'll talk about that briefly in a bit here. But to give you a brief overview of Axonics, we are a Class 3 medical device company. We develop a small neurostimulator that goes inside the patient's body, that's implanted in the patient's body for treatment of bladder and bowel dysfunction. This is a condition that is embarrassing for many people, and people don't talk about it as much, but it's a significant burden to currently the patients and the healthcare system as well. So having a device in this space was really important for us, and that's what we did. So we're based in Orange County, California, and I'll speak briefly about our clinical study here in this presentation and our collaboration with Axiom.
Thank you, Zai.
Thank
I'm
you.
going to turn it over to Kaitlyn to get us started on the case study itself and lead us through the process. Kaitlyn?
Thanks. Next. So just in terms of the relationship, so Axonics came to us to kind of work together to build up their EDC system, and they ended up using a lot of different technology, including inventory tracking and ePRO, of course, which is the focus of today. But one thing that was really important when we established our relationship was to make sure we all understood what makes a good partner. So making sure that we had alignment across our different goals of our organizations and across the study, making sure that everyone had a really great understanding of what the significance of the components are. And we'll talk about this when we talk to ePRO in particular today. Making sure that we're adaptable and flexible, thinking together to respond to the requirements. And we'll talk about that when we talk about development of the application. And then making sure we're providing the right tools to the end users. Next. So when we first started talking with Axonics, we kind of identified 3 critical needs. So the first one was to have a powerful and intuitive ePRO mobile application and questionnaire tool. That was really important for them because they're using this for their primary outcome data, and Zai's going to talk about that a little bit later. And not only just their primary outcome data, but also we're using this data to adjust the patient's treatment throughout the course of the study. So based off of the results the patient had entered in the e-diary at home, that was being reviewed before they went to their site visits, and their treatments were actually adjusted based off of their responses. So it was really important to kind of develop that tool to make it so helpful to them. And part of that, we also had obviously the needs to keep track of all of their inventory for the different components of their device, and then the reporting. So that comes back to tie it together with making sure the sites had a really easy way to look at all of that data that the subjects were bringing in, and making sure they were able to interpret that for the next item. Next. And I will pass it back to Zai to go through the eDiary component and ePRO components of their study.
Sounds good. All right. So as I was mentioning earlier, our company develops a medical device that is used for the treatment of bladder and bowel dysfunction. The way clinical studies were conducted or have been conducted in the past was that patients were creating a paper diary, which means they write each entry. So every time they visit the restroom or don't visit the restroom, for example, have an incident or episode of incontinence, they make an entry for that on the paper. And this is called a bladder diary. Typically, it spans over 3 days. And the patients in the past used to take this bladder diary into the clinic and have the coordinators review the diary. And as you can imagine, that is any questionnaire that's on paper is fraught with has a lot of user errors. So what we decided instead, in collaboration with Axiom, is to create an electronic diary. So an ePRO app, essentially a Fusion ePRO app, was provided to all patients. We had patients from the ages of 21 to 87. And I'm very happy to say even our older patients, all the way up to 87, were very happy to use this e-diary. They found it very easy and simple to use with some basic instructions, which included, something as simple as you go on your iPhone, go to the App Store, download this app called Fusion ePRO, and our company people helped them download the app, and every patient had their own username and password, and they were able to make these entries seamlessly without any error, so to speak, because the interface provided for the entries that they can make. And so this allowed for very efficient data capture on our side. So specifically, after the electronic diaries were collected, we had the ability to review them seamlessly. And this was a very important factor for us, given that e-diary data was used for our primary endpoint. And the second piece of our questionnaire was the questionnaires. So one is a bladder diary for our indication, and a second is questionnaires, which means how that were related to patient satisfaction or patient efficacy and their perception of their treatment. And these were collected in the clinic. Now, the questionnaires were collected on iPads. So how this was done was we distributed iPads to each of our sites, and the patients had, again, their own username and password, and they were able to enter their information on each of these questionnaires and answer each of the questionnaires. Another good thing was that the site coordinator was able to review the electronic questionnaires in real time, and if it seemed that there was some confusion and if the patient didn't know how to answer a certain question, the coordinator was able to help them right away. And if there was an error, they were able to fix it right away as well. So I think the great advantage definitely as compared to having not just, from going from a paper system to an electronic system, but going from an electronic system to a very real-time electronic system where you're using, where you're collecting data in real time and able to see the data in real time. So I think those were the real great advantages of having an e-diary and ePRO questionnaire. Next. We can go to the next one. So the e-diary, yeah. So specifically, you must be curious now about how the e-diary was. What was this e-diary, right? So it's actually something we wanted to collect something that is really simple. We want to collect over a period of 72 hours. Did the patient use the restroom or not? Having said that, as if you worked in clinical studies, you give simple instructions to patients and they can mess it up 100 different ways, right? And that ensues a lot of monitoring effort at the back end. So what we wanted a very simple and easy to use interface for the patients. And in collaboration with Axiom, we were able to develop this really simple and easy to use app, which, as you can see, has, we've shown the first 3 screens here, which is essentially the amount of information that we needed. So patients were given instructions to use their diary for 72 hours continuously and to record anytime they went to the restroom. So the second screen here in the middle shows, it asks the patients, well, did your event, whether it was a leak or a regular restroom visit, did it just happen? And if it did just happen, let's say a couple of minutes ago, the patients were able to just say yes, move on to the next screen, which then asked, okay, well, what type of event was it? Was it a void or a leak? And we were also able to ask for the urgency. So basically in simple 3 to 4 screens, we were able to capture really good information about the patient episodes without getting into the hassle of a paper diary, for example. Next. The ePRO app, the bladder diary app, was available on different phones. So it was available on Apple as well as Androids. Data collection, in terms of data collection, which is important from the company side, from the sponsor side, we were really happy to see that we had complete transparency to the data being entered, and we were able to see how the patients are doing over the duration of their 3-day diary. The app also had features that allowed for patient compliance. This is one of the big issues, right? Anytime we're requesting anything from patients, there could be a problem with compliance, or patient just forgot to make entries, or patient forgot to start the diary, right? So what we were able to do with this app was we were able to provide reminders to the patients 4 days before, hey, you have a diary that's going to start for the study in a few days. Doing something like that in real time, as you can imagine, costs a lot of people, effort, and resources. Versus through an app, we were able to just provide push notifications that went straight to the patient's app. Other notifications, we also designed some other notifications. Like, for example, if the patient diary was too short, less than 72 hours, we were able to provide that feedback to the patient saying that, hey, your diary is too short. Or let's say, for example, if a patient had a 16-hour gap, I mean, is it really possible to go without using the restroom for 16 hours? No, right? We all know that. So we also were able to provide those type of reminders to the patients. And in addition to that, I think one of the greatest features was that we had 24/7 customer support from Axiom. This is great because, as you know, as long e-diaries and electronic applications are really good, but if there's a small glitch, people sometimes think, okay, well, what's going on, right? I need to get into this app, and they were able to contact us 24/7. Able to contact Axiom as well, and we were able to resolve any items within 24 hours. So I was, me and my team, we were really happy with that. We were able to basically conduct a 129 patient study very seamlessly and effortlessly because of the eDiary app. Next slide. And a little bit more about the eDiary, as I was mentioning earlier, the eDiary was used at several points throughout the study. It was used at baseline, so before the treatment, to assess how the patients are doing at baseline, and then after the treatment, after implantation of this device, at several follow-up durations throughout the study. And I'm happy to say that we're at 2 years now of the study, and we've collected thousands of diaries at this point, and we've been very happy with the data collection from each of these diaries. It has provided us a seamless way to assess patients and to provide them any adjustments in therapy if those are needed. And to talk a little bit about the whole process between eDiaries and the amazing part of eDiaries really is that I think it allows the coordinators to review the diaries even before the patient comes in. So the coordinator, let's say, for example, is running around doing 20 different things when the patient is around, for example, and that's possible that they're having to attend to different needs. But because of having an eDiary, they're going to be able to review it in advance and basically have anything that they have questions about ready for the patient when the patient comes in. So I think those were some of the really key points of having the eDiary. You can go to the next one. And to review, in terms of the diaries, if the patients, for example, didn't have a smartphone, we still were able to give them the paper diary. But having said that, as I was mentioning, I think throughout the presentation, having a paper diary is just additional amount of work. So that option was available in our study, and about, I want to say, 10% of the patients did take up that option, or actually 10 to 20%. But most of the patients, 80% or more, took up the e-diary option, which was efficient for the patient as well as the study, as well as study coordinators, as well as for us. Next slide. Move it over to Kaitlyn.
Great, thanks, Sai. Also, just a note, if anyone has any questions throughout the presentation, you can just enter those within the chat, and we will address as many as we can at the end. Next slide, please. So just keeping in mind with kind of what you heard from Zai about the needs of their study so far, they really align with what we want the ePRO mobile app to do. So we want it to be patient-friendly and intuitive to capture that data. So Zai mentioned having patients as old as 87. So making sure that it's designed so easily that someone who might be less tech savvy is still able to do everything that they need to do. Also for this particular study, we wanted to have strong control on how we group the data and edit checks. So we talked about kind of having that 72-hour diary window. In this study, we let the patients control when they start and stop that window, but they had a limited amount of time. Whereas in a different study, there might be set specific days. So having control within an individual study configuration on how we limit those items. And then smart edit checks and smart notifications. So Zai mentioned reminders for patients who haven't started their diary entries before their visit, and you're kind of running out of time because if you haven't started 4 days before your visit, you're not going to get in your 72-hour window. So sending out those types of notifications, sending out reminders for patients who haven't entered data in 16 hours. So just to kind of help with any of the different aspects there. Next slide, please. So how we kind of get to that is working together with Axonics, we are able to go through multiple iterations of implementing and testing and really having an agile methodology to how we implemented all of that. So at first, we started with just the basic configuration. Then we started to add in edit checks and do some user acceptance testing on the client's end. And it's a really fine balance between putting in every possible check that you think would make you have the perfect data set, but also not being too restrictive to the patients who are actually entering the data, because you want it to be easy for them and not make it too hard, but you also want to have excellent quality data. So it was a really fine balance just to decide which edit checks were most important. So, for example, notifying the patient that they don't have 72 hours worth of data, but in this case, allowing them to still say, correct, I'm closing my window, I don't have 72 hours worth of data. So just kind of going through those different items, whereas if they didn't start their diary, what limits would we put in place if they missed their diary window and started the day of their visit? So just a really fine balance and constant communication. And I think we drew 100 different workflows of how to kind of put this all together, and lots of testing. But having that implement, test, design continually until everything was happy really made it the best possible app for this study. Next. So just in terms of reporting, so we touched on this briefly. So just working together to determine what the most important items are. So Axonics has the need to review the ePRO data in real time to make device adjustments and plan for upcoming visits. So that was a really critical item, and having access and dashboards into those types of items. If we can just skip forward. And next again. So some of the most important reporting tools, and I'll move through this quickly so we can have some time for Q&A, but having those different reports available for the different periods of time. So there's different reports that are needed in screening to determine whether or not the subject is eligible, versus that active treatment phase when we want to be able to do those live adjustments, and then looking at the critical endpoints, which is a little bit of a different focus on that same data, and taking all of this information and having it in really easy tools. Next. So this is just an example of one that was used in screening, so really simple. Next. looking at kind of the daily diary report, so a little bit more specific for ongoing enrollment, looking at specific subjects and how they're doing, and next. And then looking at that overall analysis and kind of looking at those more critical endpoints for the sponsor's perspective. So just having the right reports in place for the different stakeholders. Next. So with that, I will pass it over to Andrew to go through the Q&A portion.
Great. Thanks, Kaitlyn. Thanks, Sai. We have a few questions that have come in so far. The first question is, in a region with multiple languages, is the use of the foundation to ePRO a challenge? If so, how have you worked best to address this? I'll throw that to you, Kaitlyn, to get started.
Sure. So just in terms of multilingual support, so Fusion Mobile is mobile application can support any variety of languages. So we basically take all of those translations and load them into the app so the interface can be used by those different users. And then we would support those different regions in customer care in their natural native languages as well, so that they are also getting answers to any questions that they have. And I know we used a few different languages in the artisan study, so I'm not sure, Zai, if you have any other comments for that one.
Yes, absolutely. So we used 4 different languages because the study was conducted in Europe and US. So in Europe, we had Dutch and French available as languages. And in the United States, we had English and Spanish available as languages. I mean, technically, they were available everywhere throughout the world, but in Europe, they ended up using English and French and Dutch, whereas in US, the use was more for Spanish and English. So yes, it was seamless and patients understood what was on the diary and were able to use the diary as well.
Thank you, Zai. I think that we are running short on time. Do we have time for one more question? We'll put out a question very quickly. Just an FYI for everyone who's participating today. We thank you for spending the time with us. And obviously, please feel free to reach the Axiom team. The email address is posted, and our team members are at the booth who can answer any questions for you. So one other quick question. The march towards high quality data, how do you design the logic into the ePRO questions to ensure you end up with high quality data? And Zai, I will turn that over to you for your thoughts.
Absolutely. Thank you, Andrew. Well, I think it was, in terms of eDiary specifically, I will say that we first sat down and thought of what is the life in the day of the user, right, of a patient. And we thought, okay, well, you know, patient may, let's say, wake up at 9 a.m., right, or earlier than that. And we had an understanding for how the patient is going to work through their life, as well as understandings of what we're going to need in the electronic diary, for example, 72 hours minimum, right? We also had to ensure that there are no data integrity problems. So making sure that patients are not entering something that's infeasible. For example, they just went to the bathroom 1 time a day. That seems infeasible unless there's a really, really good explanation for that. So we decided a few of these very indication-specific measures that should be present in the diary. And then we worked with Axiom to implement those. I have to add that we were working with a group of physicians who were obviously experts in that field and who were involved in the process as well.
Thank you, Zai. Greatly appreciate it. It sounds like at the end of the day, creating something that captures the information simply is the hardest thing to do.
That is correct. I completely agree. I think the more simple you want to make, the more difficult it is to really capture.
Thanks, Sai. Guys, we're going to be running out of time. Kaitlyn, I want to thank you so much for your presentations. I thank you for spending the time with us to walk through the case study and being up on the West Coast at in California time, the start of the day.
Thank you, of course.
We
of
greatly
course,
appreciate
it's always
it.
a pleasure, Andrew.
Thank you, Zai. And for everyone who
Thank you.
participated,
Thank you,
have
Andrew.
a fantastic day.
Thanks,
Thank you
Kaitlyn.
so much. Bye-bye.